And from what fromage?
You're from Lubbock, Texas.
You son of a bitch.
And now,
What is this?
I know you're gonna dig this.
This is the Flatland Sports Podcast.
It's Division I football! It's a Big 12!
How are you doing from across the Great Plains of West Texas? This is the Flatland Sports Podcast, free and available worldwide, exclusively on YouTube, Spotify, and anywhere you get podcasts. Thank you so much for making the Flatland Sports Podcast your source for all things Texas Tech athletics, Big 12, and beyond. We'll talk about the absolute hypocrisy of college sports media and the SEC and everyone else. And while you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube so you never miss an episode. And if you want to support the show, step into the Flatland Sports store, grab some of our original shirts like Bet on Tech. We still talk about the Southwest Conference and another hypothetical win for the SEC. Plus, check out the Flatland Sports shirts and hats and other gear. Support the show and represent the Great Plains of West Texas. Visit the Flatland Sports store today. The link is in the description. So let's talk about LSU right now. Lane Kiffin is bringing in actual former NFL players to play college football. We're not talking about guys who went to an NFL workout. We're not talking about guys who went to the combine but didn't quite make it. Not even talking about guys who were drafted but never signed. We're talking about signed professional contracts, spent time in NFL camps, and in some cases actually played in NFL games. That's not even talking about the guy that they're bringing in for LSU basketball who played for the Boston Celtics. We're talking about legitimate former professionals now playing college football. And so the SEC, of course, responded. They had their meetings yesterday. They responded and announced a policy prohibiting its schools from having athletes on their rosters who have declared for the NFL, NBA, or WNBA draft and failed to properly withdraw, signed a professional contract, or have been listed on a professional roster, which is very ambiguous when you consider how many overseas professional athletes there are playing specifically college basketball. That's not discussed or mentioned and sounds like a gray area to me. The SEC commissioner is authorized to enforce the policy with penalties against its member institutions. But here's what I find interesting. The SEC's announcement says absolutely nothing about LSU, not even in a broad stroke kind of way where they're announcing what's going to happen to LSU if they continue to play the players that they want to play. There was no punishment announced for LSU, no threat of a punishment announced for LSU, no suspension. No LSU violated the integrity of college football, no threat to ban LSU from the conference championship game. It's essentially, here's our rule going forward. And I think the ambiguity of it here is fascinating because the SEC is telling us there will be penalties, but they didn't actually say what are the penalties. What are they? They don't tell us. And that's especially interesting because we're specifically talking about the good old Southeastern Conference. The SEC has been a master of finding loopholes and exploiting gray areas in order to give its members every possible competitive advantage. I mean, just look at how the SEC handles the college football bowl season. You know, where everyone else is basically letting the bowl games pick their teams based on their rankings. The SEC says, okay, you tell us what bowl games that we're qualifying for, and we'll tell you what teams are going to play for them. And if you don't put them in there, we'll just withdraw. So you're not going to get an SEC game at all. So what exactly is the deterrent here? They didn't say anything. And, you know, let's imagine what if the penalty turns out to be something like $20,000, like the penalty for students rushing the field. You know, what's stopping a school, or even if it's $1 million, what's stopping the school from saying, okay, yeah, we'll take it. We'll take a $20,000 or we'll take $1 million fine if it means we get NFL caliber talent on the roster. You know, at that point, it's not really a deterrent. It's a luxury tax. And we've seen this movie before. I mean, we've seen plenty. This is college football we're talking about here. You know, since the beginning of the sport, we have seen teams get caught up with finding ways to skirt the rules or deciding what rules are worth taking the hit on and moving forward. Michigan just got caught up in the Connor Stalions sign stealing scandal after the NCAA alleged an impermissible in-person scouting operation, and Michigan won a national championship during that same period. They decided the risk was they decided the consequences for the risk they were taking was worth going and trying to get a national championship for, even if that meant losing to TCU once, even if that meant vacating some games. Vacating games is one of the dumbest penalties that the NCAA has to offer. We all know who won those games. We all know that LSU beat Texas Tech in the 2015 Texas Bowl. There's no taking that away, regardless of what the actual official record book says. And that's why the next question is really more important than the announcement itself. What is the penalty? What are you actually going to do? Because until we know that, we don't know if the SEC has created a meaningful deterrent or just created a price tag for breaking the rule, which to me sounds a lot more like something the SEC would do, especially when you've got a little bit of pressure like the Big Ten jumping in and doing the same thing, creating a rule with actual penalties to deter schools from picking up NFL and former NFL players. But I will say, regardless of how that works, one of the few positives from this entire summer of injunctions seems to be that we've learned that conferences have more than enough we've learned that conferences have every ability to govern themselves. The Big Ten is moving forward to making its own rule prohibiting players from returning to the NFL in the conference. The SEC, of course, has formally announced its own policy. Andy Staples even pointed out, assuming that other leagues follow suit, and they will, this becomes a great test of leagues making their own rules and enforcing them independently. Players will definitely sue, but perhaps the courts will back the leagues. Public opinion certainly backs the leagues here as well, and I fully agree with that. The NCAA has nothing. They have no ability. We've reached the point that because of these injunctions and because of these settlements that players and schools continue to win against the NCAA, it is now case law that the NCAA has no ability to enforce their own rules. There's none. They have nothing. They have no ability at all. And once you won the first injunction, which everybody wants to say was Brendan Sorsby, it was actually Trinidad at Ole Miss. Once that dam burst, you had it legislated effectively. Not really legislated, but case law is kind of the step right below that, to where there was no way for the NCAA to ever recover. And at this point, the only way forward is for the NCAA to eventually collapse. And that's probably what college athletics will look like. And you'll see, at a bare minimum, a Power 4 move away from the NCAA. You might even see all of Division I, FBS and FCS, or you might just see the FBS follow suit. But at a bare minimum, the Power 4, this is like a practice run for the Power 4 going and governing themselves. And it's clear that they can do it, and it's clear that with the right moves, they'll have more than enough enforcement ability to pull that off. And so I don't necessarily have a problem with any of that. I don't have a problem with the rules being made. I don't even have a problem with the SEC doing what the SEC's doing. They should be putting these rules. I just don't believe they're going to enforce them fairly. But here's what I have a problem with, and that, of course, is the media reaction. Where is this energy when the Brendan Sorsby saga was the story? Of course, Brendan Sorsby became a national morality play. We heard integrity of the game over and over and over. He placed bets through an app, including bets on games that he wasn't participating in, almost exclusively bets on games that he wasn't participating in. And I remember pointing out the hypocrisy. Where was this moral outrage when college athletes were committing serious acts of violence or felonies? And the response I got was essentially that those things don't actually affect the integrity of the game, so they're good. It's okay to have to have murderers and people who beat their girlfriends and wives playing football, because that doesn't actually affect the integrity of the game. And as long as they didn't get popped by the courts, then they're good. Fine. I disagree, but I accept it. I accept that as an answer. And if that is the standard going forward, then how is Brendan Sorsby betting on an app on games he didn't actually participate in more damaging to the integrity of college football than putting NFL players back on college rosters? This is like the same as if you had a high school team that had a kid who dropped out of college go back to high school and play his senior year. And here's where the media reaction gets really interesting. Preston Guy, who called Texas Tech fans low IQ for defending Tech and pointing out the hypocrisy during the Sorsby situation, is now going on Twitter saying, is signing an NFL player to your team gross? Yes. Do I support any team doing this? No. But at the end of the day, if LSU didn't sign him, someone else was going to. You either play the villain or the victim in today's NCAA. And an air of supporting LSU, an air of saying, well, yeah, they're going to do it. If they didn't do it, someone else is going to do it. So why not? And that's actually a pretty reasonable argument. But where is the same standard when Texas Tech fans were making essentially the same argument about Sorsby? Brendan Sorsby won an injunction. He was legally eligible to play college football this year after a 2-game suspension. There was no, hey, the system is flawed and Tech is just taking advantage of it. There was no, if Tech didn't take him, somebody else would have. By the way, that somebody else would have been LSU. Instead, Texas Tech fans were called low IQ for defending their school and pointing out the double standard. And then I had a back and forth today with Ari Wasserman. Ari was also incredibly critical of Texas Tech and Brendan Sorsby, yet his reaction to LSU bringing former NFL players was, it's Lane Kiffin's, and this is a quote, direct quote, by the way, it's Lane Kiffin's job to bring the best players to LSU, even if that means former NFLers. And again, where was that philosophy when Texas Tech was involved? Chris Phillips had another reaction. Lane Kiffin doesn't care about the integrity of the game or what's right or wrong in your opinion. His job is to assemble the best roster for Louisiana State University and win football games. That's all he's doing here, just exposing a flawed system and using it to his advantage. Now, once again, how is that any different than what Texas Tech and Joey McGuire were doing with Brendan Sorsby? Where was that energy for Texas Tech? Pete Thamel said, essentially, LSU, all Pete Thamel said really was LSU keeps winning local court rulings. The language there is positive. LSU keeps winning. And even when Kiffin doubled down, much of the conversation became about the ridiculous rules in the court system, not LSU destroying the integrity of college football. See, nobody talked about the ridiculousness of the court system I mean, they did, but it was hidden in a veil of also Texas Tech needs to do the morally correct thing and drop Brendan Sorsby immediately. Texas Tech is wrong for keeping Brendan Sorsby on the team, despite what the courts are saying, despite how the system has worked to this point. And then Andy Staples, he clearly kind of picked up that there was at least an air of hypocrisy around national media. Andy Staples comes in and says, when Cody Campbell said people wouldn't be so mad if this was LSU, Staples said Ari Wasserman laughed. As you can see, people get very mad when it's LSU. I mean, no, they don't. No different than how they got mad at LSU last year for who knows what. Nobody is canceling volleyball games against LSU. Nobody is threatening to ban LSU from SEC competition. And yeah, the SEC has now established a rule, but notice what they're doing. They're governing the issue themselves rather than launching some massive public crusade against LSU. The issue came in, they put out a statement, then they put out another statement. We don't know what they're going to actually do after this point. But they didn't go and threaten to sue LSU. They didn't go and make public statements and fight boosters of Louisiana State University publicly. And before somebody calls this whataboutism, I know my comments are going to just be filled with people saying, it's whataboutism. You're allowed to ask the question when there's a legitimate difference in reaction. If we're going to make integrity the standard, then apply that standard consistently. Personally, I think what's happening with LSU is far more consequential to the structure and identity of college football, not to mention the actual integrity of the game, than anything Brendan Sorsby did. And certainly more having professional athletes playing on college football rosters. Like I said, that's the equivalent of having a former college athlete playing on a high school roster. That is more detrimental to the game than Brendan Sorsby placing some bets on an app on games he did not participate in. And I'm biased. I obviously root for Texas Tech. I'll own that. But this is where LSU versus Texas Tech becomes fascinating. LSU has been playing this game for forever. LSU has always been the villains. LSU has always found loopholes, always pushed the rules, always spent money. Money they weren't allowed to be spending, by the way. we won't talk about how LSU embezzled money from a Louisiana hospital to pay recruits before NIL. LSU did this to win recruiting battles, and when the rules change, you figure out how to exploit new ones. This is not just what LSU has done for forever. This is what the entire Southeastern Conference has done. And Texas Tech wasn't supposed to do that. It's quite literally the line from The Dark Knight where the Joker says, if I tell everyone that a truckload of soldiers is going to explode tomorrow, nobody cares. But if I say that one little mare is going to be killed, everybody loses their minds because it's all part of the plan. When Texas Tech is beating Texas, LSU, and Ohio State for recruits, that's rattling some cages. Texas Tech is not supposed to make the college football playoff. Texas Tech is not supposed to become a threat to the established order. So when Texas Tech does something controversial, suddenly everybody discovers integrity. And when LSU does it, well, it's Lane Kiffin's job to bring the best players available. And the best players available happen to be playing on NFL rosters right now. Guy Preston, I'll go back to his quote, you either play the villain or you become the victim in this league. And that's exactly what Texas Tech does. Texas Tech has played the villain. Texas Tech, except that they've done it in a way without actually breaking rules, by the way. Everything Texas Tech has been completely within their, not just their legal rights, but the rights that they have as members of the NCAA and the Big 12 Conference. Brendan Sorsby was eligible to play. Let's all remember that. He won an injunction. He was eligible to play, and that's what the issue people had, because people didn't lose their minds until after the injunction was granted. They didn't lose their minds before the injunction was granted. And so it's the hypocrisy. I'm not arguing that LSU should not have been punished. I'm not even arguing that they should be more punished. I'm arguing that the people who demanded the book be thrown at Texas Tech and Brendan Sorsby need to explain why the standard suddenly changed. If integrity is really the issue, apply the standard to everybody, not just the school that isn't supposed to be winning. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for spending a little bit of your day here with me here on the Flatland Sports Podcast. Whether you're listening from Lubbock, somewhere across the Great Plains of West Texas, or anywhere else around the world, I appreciate you being here. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a moment. And of course, your thoughts, questions, accusations, fits of rage are all welcome in the comments. And Friday, when we come back, will be the Flatland Sports Mailbag edition of the podcast. So get your questions in. I will read them and answer them on the show. Let me hear them. And don't forget to check out the Flatland Sports store. Pick up a hat, a t-shirt, or any other Flatland Sports gear and support the work we're doing here. Until next time, for Flatland Sports, I am Christopher Johnson. This is the Flatland Sports Podcast. I'll see you on the next one, and wreck 'em tech.